This past weekend we had UFC Fight Night St. Louis, and for not being a super hyped up card, the fighters showed out, the fans showed out. I believe Dana White said they broke the record for the highest gate of a fight night in UFC history. The fighters went crazy, like I said. Normally, I'll have, before this video, I will have out a recap of the whole card. I didn't do that this week. We're going right into matchmaking. Kicking off, I'm not going to do every fight. I'm just kind of going to do the ones I think people would want to see who the next fight is. We're kicking it off with Charles Johnson. He got a nice win over Jake Hadley. It was a really close, contested, unanimous decision. I thought there were two very clear rounds. Round one, Hadley. Round two, Charles Johnson. He dropped Hadley in that round. And then we get to the third round, and I thought it was super close. I'm not going to lie. I thought we were going to see a split decision, but all three judges gave it to Charles Johnson. And he's now on a two-fight win streak. After dropping three in a row, he lost to Ode Osborne, Cody Durden, Rafael Estevam, and now that two-fight win streak in 2024, he beat Azat Maksum and Jake Hadley. Two pretty solid fighters in my opinion, especially after dropping three in a row. He's been calling for a ranked fight now. I don't know if he's quite there. I want to see this win streak extended just a little bit. I think one more fight, three-fight win streak, maybe then we can get him in the rankings, depending on what the bottom of the flyweight rankings are looking like. Another guy, I've got two screens here, so I've just got the fighters from this past week and who I'm going to match him up against. A guy who I think is kind of in that same situation, who's looked good in the UFC so far, a finish on Contender Series. I'll just say his name first, Rafael Filho. He got a nice finish on Contender Series. In his debut, he gets matched up with Muhammad Mokaev and has him as close to finish as you could be without actually getting that finish. He had him in a nasty knee bar. Mokaev tore up some stuff in his knee. I won't say any, but 90% of other flyweights tapped to that knee bar Mokaev was in. But then he comes back after his debut, gets a finish versus Daniel Barez, gets a finish versus Ode Osborne, both round one submissions. I'd love to see these two guys. I know Charles Johnson gets a lot of grapplers. I think Rafael Filho is a bit more well-rounded maybe than some of the other grapplers he's fought. Cody Durden, not a bad striker. Ode Osborne, not really a grappler, but and then Rafael Estevam, also not the best on the feet, mainly a grappler. I think Filho mixes it all together pretty well, got an elite submission game. Both guys on a two-fight win streak, Filho having two finishes, and I'd love to see these guys fight. Winner is real close to a ranked fight, like I said, depending on what the bottom of the flyweight rankings look like at the moment. Next up, Esteban Ribovics, a disgusting head kick knockout over Terrence McKinney. I didn't matchmake for McKinney. He's probably going to be out for a little bit after such a brutal knockout. But for Ribovics, we're looking at a knockout win on Contender Series, a tough matchup for his first fight, his debut fight in the UFC versus Loic Radzhabov. Loses a unanimous decision there. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he got dropped in that third round. But since then, he got a win against Kamwela Kirk, unanimous decision, and then this knockout versus Terrence McKinney. He's a young guy. No need to rush him into anything. And again, he's only on a two-fight win streak. Trying to find. I don't have his age up anywhere for some reason. But yeah, young guy, still pretty green, relatively new to the UFC. But a lot of potential, I'd say, for sure. And somebody I'd like to see him matched up against. And this is, again, with the thought of not rushing these guys, the young guys, I'll say. Somebody who's been in the UFC a little bit longer, a year longer, but has had one more fight in the UFC, and has been in there with some pretty solid guys, I'd say. Mahashate, who also recently got a win last month. He's been in there with Steve Garcia, Rafa Garcia, Slava Claus, and most recently Gabriel Benitez, where he got a split decision win. I think this would be a really fun fight. Both guys are known to stand and bang. Both guys have pretty big power in their hands. It would be two younger prospects, if you want to call Mahashate a prospect. I don't know where you put him in that category. I don't know if you put him in that category. Both of his losses are against pretty good guys, pretty experienced guys, I'd say. Slava Claus, not the most experienced in MMA, but a pretty solid kickboxing background. And so yeah, two younger guys coming up against each other. I'd love to see who would take that one. It would be a banger of a fight, and the winner of that would kind of take that next step into the real prospect tier, I think you could say, and then we could start getting them some real tough fights, and moving them up the not the actual rankings, but like the hierarchy of the lightweights. And then we get to a guy who I have been very impressed with, as of recent, Chase Hooper. A fantastic win over somebody we just talked about, Slavoclaw, Vyacheslav Borshev. That's a tough name to say, so I'm just going to keep calling him Slavoclaw. And we saw Chase Hooper drop a former kickboxing world champion, and then absolutely put him through hell for the next 2 rounds until he was able to get him out of there. But Chase Hooper, since moving up to lightweight, it's looking like he's starting to find his feet, get into a groove. Obviously, came to the UFC really young. He's still only 24, so he's really filling out his frame. I think that cut was probably tough for him. If you heard him talk on Ariel, he said it was real draining. And this is another young guy where I think, again, 24 years old. There's no reason to rush him, even though he's on a good little win streak here, undefeated at flyweight. Unanimous decision versus Nick Fior, and then 2 submission wins in a row, Jordan Levitt and Slavoclaw. The Slavoclaw one probably could have been stopped a little bit sooner, to give Chase Hooper a TKO, but he didn't get it. It is what it is. But yeah, I think there's a matchup in the lightweight division coming up pretty soon that I don't think it would be too big of a jump for Chase Hooper, considering what we've seen so far. This matchup is between 2 pretty tough veterans that have been in the UFC for a while, have both fought some really good guys. And that matchup coming up is Jared Gordon versus Nasrat Haqparast. I don't think that would be throwing Chase Hooper to the wolves. He's also been in there with some decent guys, but I just think this is kind of the next step up, like in that hierarchy of the lightweights, the next step up of fighters. You've got Jared Gordon, who has been in there with Mark Madsen, his most recent win, been in there with Paddy Pimblett, Grant Dawson, Joe Selecki, and even a little bit ago, before the 2020s, Charles Oliveira, Diego Ferreira, Joaquim Silva. So he's been in there with some good guys. And then on the other side, if you get a win from Nasrat Haqparast, he's on a nice little 3-fight win streak, looking to build himself up towards the rankings. Also, he's only 28 years old, so he's really not too deep into his career either. Age-wise, I mean, because he's been in the UFC for quite a bit. But also another guy who's been in there with some really tough guys, Bobby Green, Dan Hooker, Rafa Garcias, Drew Dober, also Joaquim Silva. In this most recent win streak, John Makdessi, Lando Quinones, Jamie Malarkey. So he's trying to build himself up. If he gets a win versus Jared Gordon, or if Jared Gordon, in my opinion, I doubt it, but if Jared Gordon gets the win over Haqparast, I think this is the next fight for Chase Hooper. It's a step up in competition, but also not throwing him to the wolves straight away off of a good little win streak, where he's finally starting to find his feet at this new weight class in the lightweight division. So yeah, I think this would be, regardless of who wins, a good test for Chase Hooper to see where he's really at. And then if Chase Hooper is able to get that win versus whoever wins the Haqparast Jared Gordon matchup, a nice little 4-fight win streak with a really good win in what would be his most recent win against a tough vet in Haqparast or Jared Gordon. I really like that matchup for Chase Hooper, regardless of who wins. It'd be a fun fight either way, and definitely a test to see where Chase Hooper's at, without also throwing him to the wolves. Next up, Robelis Despain. There's not really too much to say about this one. I think if you knew who Robelis Despain was without being, I guess, almost tricked by what he's done so far in his MMA career, fighting like under 40 seconds for 4 fights combined, something stupid like that, and then getting the 18-second knockout in his UFC debut. A Taekwondo Olympic, I believe he was a bronze medalist or something, I'm not 100% sure, but he was in the Olympics for Taekwondo. He's 35 years old, so coming into MMA, only 5 fights previous to this Waldo Cortez Acosta fight. We knew he didn't have a grappling background. We knew his grappling probably wasn't the best, considering his age and what he's done recently. And my thing with it was we knew that was going to get exposed at some point. I didn't think it would get exposed versus somebody who's not a grappler. I thought his size and strength would probably be able to hold off guys that aren't primarily grapplers. Waldo Cortez Acosta was a baseball player and I hate to be that guy, but a failed boxer. He got knocked out twice and then moved to MMA. I think he got exposed a little quicker than I thought. I knew it was going to happen, but just quicker than I thought, and not against a grappler, which was crazy to me. With the heavyweights, there's not too many of them, and obviously coming off of a loss, you got to throw in one of the lower level heavyweights. There's not much to say about this one, really. I just think Despain. I won't say he's a big name, but I think people are interested to see what he does, considering what he can do. Give him somebody who probably, now I say that, I don't even think, I think strikers will probably go out and grapple him now. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but give him Lucas Brzeski next. Definitely 2 lower level heavyweights, just see what happens. There's not really much to say about that matchup, to be honest. But on the other side, you've got Waldo Cortez Acosta, who, although didn't put out the most exciting great performance, and obviously Dana White wasn't happy with it if you saw the post-fight press conference, but he's done well in the UFC so far. A knockout on Contender Series, rattled off 2 wins. Jared Vanderaa, Chase Sherman, got his first shot at the rankings versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Didn't go his way. His first loss in his MMA career, his only loss in his MMA career up to this point. Gets a knockout versus Lucas Brzeski, and then rattles off his last 2 wins are both unanimous decisions. Andrei Arlovsky, which was probably closer than it should have been, and Robelas Despain. Most recently, I think he probably gets another shot at the rankings here. The bottom of the heavyweight weight class is a little weird right now. A lot of guys are matched up already. I think De Lima, I can't remember if he has a matchup or not. I'm not 100%. I looked at this earlier and it all made sense in my head, but now I can't remember. Romanov's got a matchup. Rosenstrike, I've matched up with somebody else later. Nascimento's coming off a knockout. So if Waldo Cortez wants to wait, Waldo Cortez Acosta wants to wait, or if the UFC makes him to fight Nascimento, I think that would be okay too. But just with the situation of people being matched up, Cortez Acosta taking no damage at all. I don't know where Tai Tuivasa's been. I think he's like the number 11 or 12 ranked heavyweight currently. He's on a 4-fight losing streak, getting finished in all of them. His most recent 2 fights have been submission losses. So I think it would be a decent change of pace to get him in there with maybe a striker who's not the most dangerous, only knocking out somebody like Lucas Brzeski. It would give Tai Tuivasa a chance maybe to get back in the win column, but also if Waldo Cortez Acosta can get that win, that would be 5 losses in a row for Tai Tuivasa, a good name on Waldo Cortez Acosta's record, and he could finally break into the rankings after so far going 5-1 in the UFC, which is not too bad. But yeah, the heavyweight division is a weird one. There's not really a lot of heavyweights if you look at the full heavyweight roster. And under the rankings is an absolute mess. The fighters are not very high level at all. Next up, another one that'll probably be a bit of a quick one. Sean Woodson just got a win over Alex Caceres, and he's on a good little, I won't call it he's on a 3-fight win streak, but also a nice little 6-fight unbeaten streak. There's a draw in there versus Luis Saldana, and Sean Woodson called out for a rank. Well, I will say, actually, before we get into that, I think a lot of people thought Alex Caceres won. I didn't watch enough of that fight. I was up making food, getting a drink, whatever. So I didn't see enough of this fight to really give it a true score, in my opinion. But it seemed like on Twitter, a lot of people thought Alex Caceres should have got the nod there, taking the last 2 rounds probably. So it'll be interesting. They're not going to change anything. I don't know why I was going to say that, but Sean Woodson then gets on the mic after the win, which is unanimous, by the way, which is kind of crazy considering how upset Twitter was about that. But he gets on the mic, calls out Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell accepts on Twitter that's easy enough. I think you do that with the unbeaten streak that Sean Woodson's on and the 3-fight win streak. The only issue I have with Sean Woodson, and I could see being a little roadblock for him, he's not really like some dynamic, exciting finisher. He has one finish in his UFC career, not including his Contender Series fight. So I don't know how Dana White looks at that. Does he see this win streak and go a draw, 2 split decisions, 2 unanimous decisions, and a KO versus Colin Anglin? And does he think there's no reason to throw this guy into the rankings yet? No, there's no reason to give him a ranked fight yet. So I don't know. If they do just see the win streak as a win streak and feel he's deserving of a shot at the rankings, Sean Woodson called out Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell obliges. Let's get that done. If not, I don't. Sean Woodson probably fights another guy close to the rankings, but not quite in them yet, and wins another unanimous decision. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him. Next up, Diego Ferreira gets a fantastic victory against Mateusz Rebecki, an up-and-coming prospect I think quite a few people were high on, but knew the gas tank was always going to be a worry for him. And Diego Ferreira weathered the storm early, got dropped in the first round, came back, and again put Rebecki through absolute hell in 2 and 3 until he got the round 3 finish. And yeah, a fantastic performance, especially for a 39-year-old making this little resurgence. He was on a great 6-fight win streak, comes up against, or after that 6-fight win streak, ending with Anthony Pettis, by the way, a submission victory in 2020. He had a tough 2021, losing to 3 pretty solid fighters in general. Beneil Dariush, split decision loss, then getting TKO'd twice versus Gregor Gillespie and Mateusz Gamrot in a row. He was supposed to fight in 2022. He pulled out with an injury, gets back in there 2023, knockout victory versus Michael Johnson, and another TKO over Mateusz Rebecki now in 2024. So the resurgence has been cool to see. He looked fantastic. And there's 4 guys right now, including Diego Ferreira, that I think are really close right outside the rankings, that have been kind of hovering there for a bit now. Diego Ferreira, Drakkar Klose, Drew Dober, Joel Alvarez. I don't care what 2 matchups you make with these 4 guys. I think you could go Ferreira, Drakkar, Drew Dober, Joel Alvarez, or Joel Alvarez, Ferreira, Drakkar, Drew Dober. I think you could do any combination of the 4, and we'd get some good fights. They're all fun fighters for sure, and the 2 winners probably come out, and maybe the 2 winners of those fight and the one gets a ranked opportunity. Maybe both of the winners of the 2 matchups get a ranked opportunity. Who knows? But it's 4 guys that are real close to the rankings, I'd say, and that have been hovering in that area for a while. I don't know where Joel Alvarez is. I'd love to see him fight again. He's always so fun. To be honest, he's really only lost to some pretty good guys in the UFC. Demiris Magulov, Arman Sarukian, most recently. A win last July versus Mark Jacasey. 2 canceled fights this year, which is unfortunate. Visa issues versus Ludovic Klein. So he had to pull out of that one. And then he withdrew. It doesn't say on Tapology if it was for an injury or not. I can't remember, but it was supposed to be against Mateusz Rebecki. And that fight ends up getting made with Diego Ferreira. So I'd love to see these 4 guys matched up in one way or another. I think all the matchups possible with those 4 guys are really fun, and like I said, they're all real close to the rankings. So I'd love to see those matchups get made. Next up, Carlos Ulberg, 12-second knockout versus Alonzo Menifield. And I guess before I didn't really put a lot of thought into the Alonzo Menifield one. I don't know why I didn't include him, but I have the rankings pulled up here, and just off the top of my head, you could give Alonzo Menifield a guy like Azat Mirzakhanov, or if Dominic Reyes is able to get a win in his fight. I think he's fighting an unranked opponent coming up. I can't remember who off the top of my head. But if Dominic Reyes can get a win there, maybe you give him Alonzo Menifield. Azat Mirzakhanov was supposed to fight recently, had to pull out. Maybe you make that matchup. Didn't do too much thinking on that. I forgot, but just off the top of my head, I think those make sense. But Carlos Ulberg, another great knockout. He lost his UFC debut versus Kennedy Nzechukwu after a knockout on Contender Series, and since then he's rattled off 6 in a row, with 5 in a row being finishes. Fabio Charant, unanimous decision, which is funny. He's the only one Olberg didn't finish in this little run. A KO versus Tefan Nchukwi. Nikolai, I'm not saying the last name. Ihor Pateria, a knockout. Dawoon Jung, a submission in round 3, impressive. And then most recently that knockout versus Alonzo Menefield. There is a matchup, and I guess before I say who the matchup is, Carlos Olberg now gets into the rankings, debuting at number 11, so he jumps pretty high, jumping above Bogdan Guskov, there are 2 matchups there that you could make, Bogdan Guskov or Anthony Smith, but I think they should fight each other to see who the real Anthony Smith is, see who the real Lionheart is. But regardless, there's a matchup coming up, Johnny Walker taking on Volkan Oezdemir. That is next month, June 22nd. I'd love to see Olberg take on the winner of that fight. Johnny Walker hasn't won in 2 fights. One of them, obviously, is a no contest. The illegal knee, that's really not his fault. Nothing you can do about that. But then the loss against Magomed Ankalaev, where it actually is a true knockout loss. So he's on a little skid there. Before that, beating Anthony Smith, Paul Craig Cutelaba. Before that, losing to Jamal Hill and Thiago Santos. And then Volkan Oezdemir hadn't fought in a while. He fought Nikita Krylov late 2022, and then didn't fight again until late 2023, and hasn't fought since then. He beat Bogdan Guskov in Guskov's debut, where it looks like he was actually supposed to fight Mirzakhanov, but Mirzakhanov withdrew, so a lot of withdrawing from Mirzakhanov. But I think you give Olberg the winner of Oezdemir, Johnny Walker. They're both guys who are looking to kind of build back up, get back into that top 5. Olberg is on a fantastic run right now, surging his way up the rankings, especially if he can get another win. And I think it's a great matchup. I'd love to see Olberg take on one of these guys. Next up, Nursultan Ruziboev. And this is an interesting one because I don't think he's that good. I think outside of the UFC, he didn't really fight the best of the best. Maybe he's got a couple decent wins in there. But regardless, he comes in, accidentally knocks out Bruno he caught Bruno Ferreira really early into the fight. Beats Cedricas Dumas by eye poke. If you've got to eye poke Cedricas Dumas to beat him, that says a lot in my opinion. And then takes a short notice opportunity down a weight class, which is a weight class where he didn't have any wins at previous to the UFC. So his 2 fights in the UFC were at 85, cuts down to 70 on short notice in a weight class, again, where he didn't have any wins outside the UFC. And took on Joaquin Buckley on short notice. Wasn't particularly close in my opinion. I guess the first round was. Neither of them really did much. Neither of them could really land. So I guess that round could go either way. But really, Joaquin Buckley took over after that. The takedowns were there for him. He kind of figured out how to get inside Ruziboev's range, gets the knockdown in round 3, and again puts Ruziboev through hell in that round 3 to get the unanimous decision victory in his hometown, which he called for on short notice. And taking an unranked guy on short notice just so you can fight in your hometown is pretty badass. So we all appreciated that. But I've got 2 matchups here for Ruziboev, and I think either of them will really, really show us what level he's at. And there's a fight for each weight class, I'd say, if he decides to stay at 70, which I don't think he will, and if I was advising him, which I'm not, I would not advise him to. And then a matchup at 85, obviously, which I think he should jump up and go back to 85. But the one at 170, Jeremiah Wells, was on a great undefeated streak in the UFC, beating Warley Alvarez, Blood Diamond, Court McGee, and Matthew Semmelsberger, which the Semmelsberger one was definitely a close fight, ended up being a split decision. And then he loses a fight to Carlson Harris, one in which he was absolutely dominating, gets caught in a choke in round 3, and then loses a close split decision to Max Griffin, who is a tough vet who's been in there with some good guys. That's all you can really say about that one. I think if Nursultan Ruziboev is as good as people are making him out to be on Twitter, on just MMA media in general, I guess not like like legacy MMA media, like the journalists and stuff, but MMA social media, I should say. I don't think he's as good as people are making him out to be, but if he can't beat Jeremiah Wells, then I'm right. And then next up, moving up a weight class, which I really do think he should go up a weight class. Both his wins are there. He's not fully defeated at that weight class. I think you go Edmen Shahbazyan. He was the golden child coming into the UFC, fighting out of Ronda Rousey's camp. Looked good early on, won 4 in a row to start off his UFC career. That last win on that run of 4, a head kick knockout versus Brad Tavares. People were really high on him. The hype was real. Then he gets absolutely torn down, brutalized by Derek Brunson, loses a split decision to Jack Hermanson, and gets put in a crucifix and brutalized by Nasruddin Imavov. And then in his last 3 fights, most recently, he's gone 2-1, and obviously it's not against the best competition. The wins are against Dolce Lugambula and AJ Dobson, 2 finishes, so doing what he's supposed to do against opponents of that caliber. And then in between those 2 wins, he took on Fluffy Hernandez, Anthony Hernandez, a guy who's surging in his own right at the moment into the rankings, has looked very good lately, just beat Roman Kopylov very decisively, I'd say. And Anthony Hernandez was able to get the round 3 finish there. Cardio has always been an issue for Edmen Shahbazyan. But coming off of this most recent win in March, the knockout against AJ Dobson, or I guess the TKO against AJ Dobson, I'd love to see this matchup. Edmen's still young. Ruzi Boev, we still really don't know. Because, you can't hold a short notice down a weight class fight against him, really. But I'm just not convinced, personally, by the other 2 wins in his career previous to the UFC. I think Edmen Shahbazyan is a great matchup for him. Edmen's trying to get back to where he was pre that three losses in a row, trying to get back to what he was on that 4-fight winning streak early in his career. And I think it would be a good test for him. I think it would be a very good test for Nursultan Ruziboev, just to see exactly what level he's at. And I really do hope he does go back up to 85 and doesn't stay at 70, which I don't think he will, but made a matchup for both just in case. Next up, the winner of that fight, the winner of the co-main event, Joaquin Buckley. Like I said, a close round 1, not really much happened. You could tell Nursultan was trying to counter. Joaquin Buckley was having trouble getting in close. I think Joaquin maybe had a takedown in the first round, but not super decisive. You could score it either way, in my opinion. And then round 2, Buckley starts to take over with the takedowns. He's starting to find his range, or starting to figure out how to get inside Ruziboev's range, finds that knockdown in round 3, and absolutely dominates in round 3. Gets the unanimous decision. I believe he's the 11th ranked welterweight at the moment. And again, a change of weight class for him. I guess I'm saying another because I talked about Chase Hooper earlier, but a change of weight class for him, and it's been great. He had some wins up at middleweight, but it obviously wasn't the weight for him. He's not the tallest guy. I guess you could say the weight class doesn't suit him well. He's come down to 170, has 2 knockouts, 2 unanimous decisions, and has looked great. A knockout win or a TKO win over Vicente Luque is fantastic. So he's in the rankings now, ranked number 11, and he got that ranking for beating Vicente Luque, not Ruziboev. I don't think his ranking changed, actually, after the Ruziboev win, which it shouldn't. But he called out Conor McGregor in the cage. Everybody knows that's just to kind of get his name out there, get the hype up. But in the post-fight press conference, he actually gave a realistic call-out of Gilbert Burns, which Gilbert Burns is on a 2-fight losing streak, 2-3 in his last 5, losing to Chimaev, beating Neil Magny and Jorge Masvidal, which is not very impressive in my opinion, for the level he could be at. A unanimous decision loss versus Bilal Muhammad, where he did get injured early on in that fight. I think he had an arm injury, if I'm not mistaken. And then was beating Jack Della Maddalena, definitely more impressive than the 2 wins he had. But Jack Della Maddalena was able to find the finish at the end of the 3rd. And he's looked very good recently, so it'll be interesting to see what he does next also. But 2 losses in a row for Gilbert Burns. He obviously has to defend his rank against somebody outside of the top 10, in my opinion at least. And I think Joaquin Buckley is that guy. It would be a great matchup. Buckley is a decent wrestler himself. Gilbert Burns would obviously want to try and get that fight to the ground, use his grappling, which is obviously his strong suit. He's not a bad striker. He's actually, I'd say, a pretty decent striker, but striking with a guy like Joaquin Buckley, when you probably won't have a crazy size advantage over him, and Gilbert Burns coming up on 40 himself. I don't know. It's a good matchup in my opinion, and I think Buckley deserves it probably, to be honest. So another one I would like to see. And last up, this one should be obvious in my opinion. It's one we don't need. It's one we deserve. Derrick Lewis gets that knockout against Rodrigo Nascimento. He goes 2 rounds trying to show he's a well-rounded mixed martial artist, trying to look for these trips in the clinch. He does get a takedown or two, not really any top control time, but I think he just did it to show he could do it. In between rounds 2 and 3, his coach said, just go knock this guy out now, and Derrick Lewis did it. There's not much else to say about it. He landed the big shot he needed, got Rodrigo Nascimento out of there, and now, like I said, we can finally get the fight we deserve. We need Derrick Lewis versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I don't think there's much explaining to do. 2 big, powerful strikers who in this matchup won't have to worry about the grappling. They can both just go out there and sling, and we can see who connects first. Jairzinho is currently 2-1 in his last 3, only losing to a grappler in Jailton Almeida, and most recently beating what was supposed to be the future, I guess on Twitter at least, the future of the heavyweight division in Shamil Gaziev. Couldn't do anything in the grappling department there. Jairzinho Rozenstruik ends up beating him up on the feet for the next 3 rounds after that first, and Gaziev retires on the stool in between rounds. Previous to that, a loss to Volkov, a loss to Blades, and like I said, that loss to Jailton Almeida. So I'd love to see 2 big dudes who have big power just sling at each other with not having to think about the grappling. I think that would be awesome. And yeah, that rounds out the matchmaking for this card. On TikTok on Friday, I will have main event predictions for this weekend, UFC Vegas 92. Normally I don't complain about the cards because I'll watch anybody fight, but it is kind of a dud of a card. They have to happen on occasion, and I think we've got one this weekend. It is what it is, but the main event is nice. Edson Barbosa, Lerone Murphy. I'm quite excited for that fight. And then next week I will be back trying to get some consistency back in making videos with a recap of the card as well as matchmaking. Then we've got a week off, and then we'll be back after that. So yeah, peace.